I was mid-sip of my mimosa when the text came in. "You're no longer welcome at the family reunion. This relationship is over." My father's words, as cold and final as an eviction notice. And just like that, everything I thought I understood about loyalty, blood, and duty unraveled, right there at a bustling Connecticut brunch table. What would you do if your family cut you off just as you were about to co-sign a $1 million deal to help them? Stick around, because this isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about reclaiming control, piece by calculated piece. My name is Elizabeth Monroe, and I learned the meaning of unwanted between bites of avocado toast. It was one of those sun-drenched New England Sundays, air-crisp cafe chatter rising and falling like waves. I was seated on the patio of the Elm Table, a place my mother had once described as, quote, quaint enough for small-town nostalgia, posh enough for family photos. I had just signed the final page of paperwork that would link me to a $7 million commercial real estate loan. For them. For my parents. For a dream they said they had built for our family's future. And then, like a hand reaching through silk, my phone buzzed once, then fell eerily silent. From Dad, "You're no longer invited to the reunion. This relationship is over." There was no preamble, no call, just that message, delivered with the sterile cruelty of a transaction declined. I blinked, reread it, felt the toast go dry in my mouth. I didn't cry, didn't even blink twice, because some betrayals are so sharp they don't bleed right away. Instead, I did what I always do. I watched. The brunch crowd was still laughing, the waitress still refilling coffee cups. Life didn't pause for the moment I lost my family, but inside me, something very quietly cracked. I excused myself from the table where my friend Julia sat chatting about her son's science fair. I think I mumbled something about a work email. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. Years of corporate finance trained me well. Mask the panic, protect the core. But as I walked to my car, parked neatly between a Tesla and a vintage Volvo, I began replaying every moment of the last few months. The phone calls from my father about family legacy. The guilt-laced dinners where he'd said things like, "We've always supported your career, Liz. Surely you can support ours." The sudden urgency in finalizing the documents, and the way my mother never once said thank you. Was this their plan all along? I didn't know, and I wasn't going to ask. Instead, I drove, past the daffodils, blooming along Route 12, past the church where they baptized me, back to my sleek, quiet house in Litchfield. A home I had built with my own hands and strategy, every square foot earned without anyone's help. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the marble kitchen island, and opened the loan file. That was when the cool strategist in me, my truest self, stepped forward. No tears, no calls, just swift, silent action. I pulled up the legal draft on my laptop, found the signature field, and clicked Remove Cosigner. Then, I opened my banking app and began transferring joint funds into a protected legal trust I had quietly established years ago, for emergencies only. I never thought this would be the emergency, but maybe that's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come with warning labels. As I watched the transfer process, I wondered, not for the first time, if family truly meant anything without trust. I guess I was about to find out. The next morning, I woke to chaos I hadn't invited. 36 missed calls, 5 voicemails, a dozen text messages with enough exclamation points to fill a courtroom transcript. My phone was overheating on the nightstand, as if it too were exhausted from the sudden urgency of everyone remembering I existed. I didn't open any messages. I just stared at the lock screen, caller ID after caller ID repeating the same last name, Monroe. Funny how quickly you become important again when money's on the table. At 7:12 a.m., the silence broke for good. The name blinking across the screen this time wasn't family. It was Mr. Alden, my father's longtime accountant. I answered. Elizabeth. His voice was strained, too formal. "I hope this isn't a bad time. Considering I was just disowned mid-brunch yesterday, I'd say timing is relative," I replied coolly, walking to the kitchen to make coffee. He didn't laugh, he didn't correct me, just said, "I think you already know the loan deal is falling apart." I didn't answer, just let him speak, while the espresso machine hissed in the background. "Your withdrawal triggered an immediate red flag," he explained. "The bank's risk department is auditing everything. Your father's financials, the business plan, even old tax filings. It's serious." "I imagine it is. Elizabeth, there are penalties. The deal had preliminary insurance locked in based on your inclusion. They could be looking at 6-figure fines." And then, more quietly, "They didn't tell me they were cutting you out. I only found out when the bank flagged your removal." My fingers tapped absently on the countertop. "I'm not looking for apologies, Mr. Alden. I'm looking for clean boundaries." He exhaled into the phone. "I understand, but they're in panic mode. Your brother's flying in. Your mother's, well, it's a mess." I almost felt bad for him. Almost. He was caught in the middle of a war he never asked to be part of. But then again, so was I. "I'll let you get back to it," I said, ending the call before sentiment crept in. I took my coffee outside to the porch and watched the late spring sunlight paint my garden in gold. Tulips were blooming, defiant and unapologetic. Maybe I could learn from them. For a brief moment, I thought about my father. What must be going through his head as the numbers unraveled? He wasn't stupid, just used to getting his way. My entire childhood, he'd been charming at the dinner table and calculated behind closed doors. The kind of man who smiled at neighbors while tracking every cent his children spent. It wasn't personal, it was habit, survival strategy. The image mattered more than intimacy. But I was no longer his asset, and I had just become his liability. At noon, my phone rang again. This time, I recognized the number instantly. Jonathan, my brother. He never called. Not unless he wanted something. I let it ring 4 times before answering, just long enough for him to sweat. "You need to fix this," he snapped before I could say a word. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I sipped my coffee. "You'll have to be more specific." "The Florida property. Our down payment's tied up in that deal. So is Mom's insurance rollover. Dad was planning retirement around this. You just blew up the whole timeline." "Interesting," I said, voice level. "And none of that warranted so much as a conversation before I was written out of the family?" There was a beat of silence. Then, "That text wasn't supposed to be permanent." He was angry. "You were being difficult about the paperwork." I laughed. Soft, bitter. I was about to sign over nearly $2 million in personal liability. "Forgive me for asking questions," he sighed. "You don't get it. We had plans, Liz. Long-term ones. This deal was the centerpiece." "No," I said, voice hardening. "You had plans. I was just the checkbook." His tone shifted. Defensive now. "You're overreacting." I stepped back into the house, letting the door close quietly behind me. "No, Jonathan," I said. "I'm reacting just enough." And then I hung up. Because I knew what was coming next. This was only the beginning. The knock came at 4:07 p.m., sharp and too deliberate to be mistaken for a neighbor dropping off mail. I already knew who it was before I opened the door. Jonathan stood on my front steps, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, the same way he used to look after one of his impulsive late-night poker games back in college. Except now, the stakes weren't chips. "Can we talk inside?" he asked, not even offering a hello. I didn't move. "This is my home," I said. "You're not entitled to it." He exhaled through his nose like a man pretending to stay calm. "Come on, Liz. Don't make this into a power play." I arched an eyebrow. "Wasn't that Dad's job yesterday?" He gave me a look. Part guilt, part exasperation. "Can we just talk?" I let him in. Not because I owed him, but because I wanted to see how fast he'd squirm when I didn't fold. He paced my living room like it was a courtroom exhibit. Same polished confidence. Same self-appointed authority. "You're going to reverse the transfer," he said finally. "Dad's lawyer says if we resubmit with a new guarantor, I'm not reversing anything." "You're really going to tank this entire deal because of a text message?" I set my coffee cup down and walked to the window. The afternoon light was softening. My tulips hadn't moved. I envied their simplicity. "It wasn't just a text," I said. "It was a declaration, a severance." He laughed, short and humorless. "You know how Dad is. He doesn't mean half of what he says." "No," I said, turning to face him. "He meant exactly what he said. He just didn't expect me to believe him." That shut him up. Jonathan rubbed his face, dragging a hand through his hair like that would undo the mess. "Liz," he said, more gently now, "Mom's been crying." They had everything riding on this deal. Retirement, the Florida house. They're not bad people, they just made a mistake. A mistake? The word hovered in the air, begging to be forgiven. Like this was a dropped plate, not a calculated betrayal. I stepped closer. You don't get to use mistake as a blanket for manipulation. They knew what they were doing. They counted on me signing. And when I asked for transparency, they treated me like a threat. Jonathan's jaw tightened. This isn't about you versus the family. But it is, I said, my voice lowering, because I was never part of the plan, just a tool to execute it. He looked away. I covered Mom's hospital bills in 2019, I said, quietly. Never asked for payback. Paid off your credit card debt when you were drowning in Vegas. Never told Dad. You know why? Jonathan didn't answer. Because I believed we were a family, I said. Not a business deal. He sank into the nearest chair, suddenly looking years older. So what now? He asked. You're just cutting us off? For good? No, I said softly. I'm setting terms. For the first time. We sat in silence. Then I added, the transfer is done. The loan's your problem now. Jonathan nodded slowly, processing the blow. He stood, adjusted his cufflinks as if to save face, and turned to leave. But just before he stepped out, he looked back. You were the smart one, he said, voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. We just never thought you'd turn it against us. I didn't, I replied. You did that all on your own. Then I closed the door behind him, gently, but with finality. It echoed through the hallway louder than any scream. It was the email, not the phone call, that tipped me off first. Subject line, Notice of Procedural Audit. Commercial application #A1093F from the bank. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Dear Ms. Monroe, as per your recent withdrawal from the co-signing agreement on loan application A1093F, a procedural audit has been triggered to verify all associated documentation and party disclosures. I scanned the language, growing more alert with every paragraph. The words were cold, legal, and steeped in implication. Then I read it again. My withdrawal didn't just stall the deal. It triggered a full-scale review, the kind banks only do when something smells off. A few hours later, the phone rang. Ms. Monroe, this is Celeste Redmond from Franklin Fidelity, said a precise voice on the other end. Do you have a moment to discuss the flagged loan? I cleared my throat. Of course. Celeste didn't waste time. I wanted to thank you for the clarity in your withdrawal documentation. As part of the risk assessment triggered by your change in role, we conducted a back-end audit of the full application trail. Okay, her voice remained steady. Several inconsistencies were discovered, including altered income statements from Monroe Holdings LLC and misrepresented collateral documentation. I blinked. Are you saying? We've flagged the application as non-compliant. It will be terminated in our system within the next 48 hours. And no penalties will be issued to your name, thanks to your formal removal prior to audit. Relief hit me like cold water. So, I'm not liable? Correct. In fact, she paused, your timing may have prevented a fraud review against you personally. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. I see, I said, the pieces clicking into place. Celeste continued. We will be notifying the other parties involved, but I thought you deserved the courtesy of a direct update. Thank you, I said. Genuinely, I appreciate your thoroughness. When the call ended, I sat in stunned silence. They were going to go through with it. My parents, my own family. They were going to let me attach my name, my record, my entire financial reputation to a lie, and they weren't even going to warn me. Not a single word. It wasn't about a family project anymore. It was about risk and exposure and manipulation, packaged in a sentimental story about investing in our future. And I had almost signed it all away. I should have been angry, but I wasn't. Not in that moment. What I felt instead was something rarer, clarity, the kind that slices clean. They didn't just betray me, they endangered me. I pulled open my drawer, found the folder I kept of every invoice, bank record, and passive-aggressive text I'd received about family obligations in the past year. I labeled a new envelope, protection file, and then I added the audit notice on top. By the time evening fell, I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped outside to sit under the porch light, watching dusk settle over my lawn like a sigh. For the first time in days, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. because for once, I was already 2 moves ahead. They wanted control, but I had just taken the one thing they never saw coming: leverage, and I wasn't about to waste it. My mother's call came the next morning. Not a voicemail, not a text. A full-on FaceTime request at 6:42 a.m., as if sheer timing would catch me off guard. I let it ring. Then I watched it ring again, and then the voicemail came, clipped, breathy, and expertly rehearsed. "Elizabeth, we need to talk. There's been some confusion. Your decision with the loan has caused repercussions, and I just want to clarify a few things before the extended family gets the wrong idea. Please call me back." The wrong idea? That was the phrase that stuck. I didn't call back, but I did check Facebook, and that's where the performance had begun. A new post from her. A photo of a garden, her garden, with a quote about the pain of betrayal and family who turns away when you need them most. 3 comments deep, a cousin had already replied, "Sending love. Let me know if we can help with Florida. So sorry to hear this." They were shaping the narrative. I wasn't the daughter who'd protected herself from financial fraud. I was the one who had abandoned them. Cold, unstable, selfish. And soon enough, the phone calls started. First, it was Aunt Marianne, who I hadn't spoken to in over a year. Then it was an old family friend from my dad's golf league. One by one, the calls came in, each carrying that same fragile, loaded phrase: "We just want to understand what's going on. Your mother's really struggling." The thing was, I knew what they were doing. And it wasn't confusion, it was containment. Damage control disguised as concern. They weren't trying to understand. They were trying to shape my silence. Later that afternoon, my doorbell rang. Rachel. My cousin Rachel stood on my porch, clutching a takeout coffee, and looking more bewildered than judgmental. I hadn't seen her since the New Year's party last year. She was one of the few in the family who had always walked the line, kind, observant, and just distant enough from the drama to seem neutral. "I brought you something," she said, holding out the coffee like a peace offering. I hesitated, then stepped aside. We sat in the kitchen, the air heavy with awkward civility. Finally, she spoke. "I don't know who to believe," she said, voice soft, "but something's off." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean the part where they cut me out of their lives, then begged for a co-signer?" "No." Rachel reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. "I mean this." She opened a message thread and handed it to me. There it was, in black and white. A conversation between her and my father from nearly 2 months ago. Him. "We've decided to exclude Elizabeth from the reunion. She's become uncooperative about supporting the family plan. Don't mention it yet." Him again a few days later. "It's better she thinks it's her choice. She's never been a team player." I stared at the screen. Rachel sipped her coffee. "He told everyone you refused to help, that you didn't believe in the family's future, that you pulled out of the loan for selfish reasons." She looked down, then added, "He said you were emotionally unstable." I closed my eyes for a moment. That was it. They hadn't just erased me from their plans. They'd rewritten the entire timeline, twisting the facts until I became the villain in my own story. "How long have you known?" I asked. She looked guilty. "Only since yesterday. I didn't know the messages went back that far." I nodded, throat tight. "Well," I said, standing, "at least now you've seen it." Rachel stood too, quiet for a beat. "I just thought you should know what's being said. I'm sorry." I didn't say thank you. I just walked her to the door. Because truthfully, I didn't need apologies anymore. I needed evidence, and I was starting to gather plenty. It started with a voicemail from a name I didn't recognize. A woman speaking in clipped legal tones. "Ms. Monroe, this is attorney Diane Kessler calling on behalf of Monroe Holdings, LLC. We filed a civil complaint regarding the breach of financial obligation and interference with contractual agreements. Please contact my office within 48 hours. I played it 3 times. Each word was carefully measured, but what they meant was unmistakable. My family had just sued me. Not threatened, not hinted. Filed. The moment I stepped into the hallway, it felt like the floor wasn't steady. I pressed my hand against the wall. My breathing slowed, but my heartbeat didn't. They'd actually done it. They hadn't just turned the family against me. They were trying to destroy my name. By noon, copies of the complaint were in my inbox. 14 pages of accusations. Intentional disruption, reputational damage, willful obstruction of a family enterprise. They even used phrases like malicious withholding of funds and, quote, negligent endangerment of generational wealth. I skimmed through it in silence, rage curling behind my ribs. Because this wasn't just an attack, it was strategy. They wanted to scare me into submission, humiliate me into silence. But they'd miscalculated something vital. I don't rattle, not when the truth is on my side. I pulled up my files, the ones I'd begun compiling after my call with Celeste. Documents, emails, financial transfers. Every receipt of every loan I'd ever provided, informally. Even audio recordings, legally obtained, of 2 conversations where my parents assured me I'd be compensated for my assistance on the Florida down payment. They wanted a battle, so I built an arsenal. By that evening, I sat across from Malcolm Pryor, my attorney, a composed man with salt and pepper hair and a voice that could end arguments before they started. He glanced through the complaint with mild disdain. "This is laughably weak," he said, tapping his pen. "The timing, the context, it all works in your favor. They're panicking. Can they ruin my reputation with it?" I asked. Malcolm shook his head. "Not if we get ahead of it. We'll file a response and include counterclaims. You've got documentation for every major accusation." He paused, then leaned forward. "I know this is personal, but you need to remember, it's also political now. They're using public pressure, family manipulation. We need to take control of the narrative." I nodded, jaw set. This wasn't about reconciliation anymore. It was about defense. Malcolm filed our response the next day, a calculated, concise takedown of the original complaint, accompanied by Exhibits A through K, transfers, emails, property co-funding records, and the signed acknowledgement from my father that I had rescued the business account during a liquidity crisis last spring. I didn't need to exaggerate. The truth was damning enough. What surprised me most was the quiet that followed. No one called, no one texted. It was like I'd vanished from their script the moment I stopped playing the victim, but the silence didn't last. That Friday, I received a screenshot from an old college roommate. A gossip blog from our hometown had picked up the civil complaint. "A strange daughter sabotages family legacy?" The headline sat atop a filtered photo of me from my LinkedIn page, cropped beside a smiling image of my parents at a charity gala, and the article was dripping with slant. That's when I realized something crucial. They didn't want to win in court. They wanted a win in perception. They wanted me ruined socially, not legally. Because the facts couldn't save them. But rumors? Rumors moved faster than truth ever could. I stared at the screen. Then I whispered aloud to no one. "You made this public." And now I had no reason to keep anything private. They wanted headlines, so I gave them one. 2 days after the gossip blog post, I walked into Malcolm's office with a flash drive and a simple request. "I want this public. All of it." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? Once it's out, there's no walking it back." "They declared war," I said. "I'm just matching tone." That afternoon, our media response went live, not through a tabloid, but via a well-respected legal and business forum where reputations carry weight. The headline was mine this time: "How I Quietly Funded My Family's Legacy and Why I'm Done." The post began with calm precision, no venom, just facts. Over the past 10 years, I've contributed over $460,000 to my family's ventures, without contract, interest, or acknowledgement. These were loans, emergency bailouts, credit extensions, and infrastructure costs paid directly to projects bearing our family's name. I've done so silently, believing in a shared vision. That vision, I've come to realize, excluded me. I attached supporting documentation, PDFs of wire transfers, dated emails requesting just one more favor, even a voice memo of my father saying, "You've always been the dependable one, Liz. You're the backbone of this family." It wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The article ended with this line: "I'm no longer asking for understanding. I'm asserting ownership of my choices. And I choose, moving forward, to protect myself." Within an hour, my inbox lit up. Former colleagues, college friends, even distant cousins reached out. The tone was unanimous. Supportive, stunned, respectful. People saw it for what it was now. Not a scandal, but survival. And then came the silence from my family's side. Deafening, telling. They hadn't expected me to counter. Not like this. Not with receipts. That night, I received a one-line email from Rachel. They don't know what to say. For once, it made me smile. Because I hadn't shouted. I hadn't accused. I'd simply laid down the truth. Documented. Undeniable. A day later, Malcolm forwarded a new message from opposing counsel. Their tone had changed. No longer aggressive. Now, cautious. Apparently they were open to mediation. Translation. They were looking for a quiet way out. But I wasn't done yet. This wasn't about settling scores anymore. This was about setting precedent. They had built a story with my name, then tried to bury me under it. Now I had taken it back. And I wasn't giving it up. 3 days after I released my statement, Malcolm called with an update. They've submitted a proposal, he said. A soft retraction of the civil complaint in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement. They'll agree to cease further claims if you agree to take the article down and release a joint statement framing this as a, quote, misunderstanding. I didn't speak. They're offering to settle quietly, he added, but only if you play along. I knew what that meant. They wanted to erase the public evidence, disappear the timeline, seal the facts behind legal jargon so they could keep pretending I was the difficult one. They want to keep the narrative, I said. Malcolm nodded. And your silence. A few months ago, I might have said yes. For peace, for closure, for some thread of connection that felt like family. But not now. Now I saw it all clearly. They weren't trying to reconcile. They were trying to recover control. No deal, I said. They made this public. They can live with it public. Malcolm smiled faintly. That's what I thought you'd say. He sent the official response that afternoon. Rejection of the NDA, refusal of the joint statement, and confirmation that we would proceed with our counterclaim unless they issued a full and public apology and dismissed the original filing with prejudice. A bold ask, one I knew they'd never agree to, but I didn't care, because I wasn't bargaining anymore. I was building something else, freedom. That evening, as if summoned by the shift in tone, my father finally made contact. No lawyers, no filtered intermediaries, just a single message left on my voicemail. I hope you're satisfied. That was all he said. No apology, no clarification, just wounded pride disguised as blame. But here's what he didn't realize. I wasn't looking for satisfaction. I was looking for distance. The next morning, Rachel messaged me again. They're trying to spin it to the extended family, but no one's biting anymore. Too much proof. Uncle Joseph told your mom, this is what happens when you forget your children are adults with memories. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was true. You can't rewrite a life someone else has lived. I poured myself a glass of wine and stared out at the yard, watching summer begin to stretch itself across the garden. The same garden my mother once judged as too modern, not warm enough. It didn't matter anymore. Warmth wasn't something I owed anyone now. I had given enough, covered enough, lost enough. This silence, this space, this hard-earned solitude, it was mine, and I wasn't trading it for anything. Not money, not legacy, not the illusion of loyalty. My story had changed, because I had changed it. It came quietly, like they hoped I wouldn't notice. A 2-line email from Monroe Holdings legal team. Per your attorney's request, Monroe Holdings LLC has formally withdrawn the civil complaint against Elizabeth Monroe. All prior claims are dismissed with prejudice. No joint statement, no retraction, no apology, just silence, shaped like surrender. Malcolm forwarded me another document minutes later, a statement signed by my father and submitted to the bank, acknowledging administrative oversight in their loan application. The wording was cold, sanitized, but it said everything. He admitted to fabricating financials, not emotionally, not directly to me, but on paper, and only because he had to. It wasn't guilt, it was strategy. They had hoped to save face, until they realized there was no face left to save. The bank canceled the loan, froze assets pending audit review, and just like that, their empire of family legacy paused, not burned down, but exposed. That night, I sat on the porch again, sipping wine from a glass that caught the last gold sliver of sun. I watched the neighborhood lights flicker on, one by one, life moving forward, unapologetic. Across the street, a car pulled up slowly, a black sedan I recognized instantly. My father's? He didn't get out. just parked on the far side of the street, engine idling, watching my house as if it still belonged to his idea of me. For 10 minutes, we lived in that strange distance, close enough to see each other, too far to speak. I didn't wave, he didn't flash his lights. And then, just as quietly as he'd come, he pulled away. Maybe that was the apology, or the ghost of one. But it didn't matter, because I had finally stopped waiting for him to explain. I no longer needed their version of closure. What I had was better, clarity. I walked back inside, locked the door, and returned to my files. That evening, I signed the final document I'd been putting off for weeks, a formal relinquishment of all financial ties to the Monroe family. Every shared asset, every joint venture, every lingering entitlement, gone. By morning, it would be official. The woman they had used like a safety net was no longer tethered to their fall. And for the first time in years, I slept with no weight on my chest. Because you don't need an apology from people who never saw you clearly. You just need to see yourself clearly enough to walk away. June 8th, the date circled in gold ink on the original reunion invitation. Before the text, before the withdrawal, before everything fractured. It was supposed to be the day we all gathered at the family lake house, sharing stories over grilled salmon, sipping wine beneath the string lights Dad insisted on every year. The Monroe Summer Kickoff, he used to call it. But today, the lake house sat in legal limbo. And I was here, at my own house, signing the last page of my disentanglement agreement. Malcolm had sent a courier that morning. All that remained was a signature and a single notarized clause, relinquishing my financial claim to everything I'd ever helped fund: the Florida property, the LLC, the legacy portfolio. I signed with a glass of red in one hand, the other steady. No regret, no fear, just finality. Outside, the sun was setting slow and wide, casting long gold stripes across the hardwood floor. My phone buzzed. A message from Rachel. They're still doing the quote reunion. Just them and a few loyal cousins. It's awkward. No one's talking much. By the way, he's there, but he's not smiling. I didn't reply. Instead, I poured another glass, curled into the chair by the window, and opened the last file I'd kept sealed. My old family photos. Childhood vacations. Awkward teenage holiday shots. Birthday dinners at overpriced restaurants. There we were, the perfect Monroe family, frozen in poses, framed in expectations. I studied my younger self, smiling in every photo, shoulders slightly tilted inward as if I were always bracing. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to hold things together, trying to be the daughter who didn't rock the boat, the sister who smoothed the edges, and how no one noticed until I stepped away. Sometime past 9, I walked out to the porch, and that's when I saw it. A car across the street, lights off, engine quiet. Again. He didn't get out, didn't wave, just sat there, still, watching, as if by observing he could undo what had already been done. For a moment, I thought about walking over, but I didn't. Because this wasn't a scene that needed closure. It was a scene that needed distance. I lifted my glass. Not a toast, just a gesture. Calm, resigned. He didn't return it. Eventually, he drove off, slowly, without headlights. And I exhaled. Inside, my phone buzzed again. Rachel, are you okay? I typed back, I am now. Because I was. And the beauty of it was, I hadn't won by forcing anyone's hand. I'd won by taking mine back. 3 weeks passed. The media storm faded. The legal chatter dulled to a quiet hum. And my inbox stopped filling with cousins trying to see both sides. In the quiet that followed, I found something I hadn't expected. Space to breathe. I woke up each morning without bracing for a battle, without scanning messages for passive-aggressive guilt trips dressed as check-ins. My calendar, once crowded with family obligations and emotionally loaded quick calls, was now mine. My home felt different too. Without the looming presence of family expectations, the walls seemed warmer. My kitchen echoed with music again. Jazz in the morning, Nina Simone in the evening. I cooked for myself, bought flowers for the table, and spent weekends reorganizing every inch of my house like I was claiming it anew. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. At first, it was just memories, disjointed, sharp-edged, but slowly, those pages turned into blueprints, ideas, futures I had never let myself imagine. One morning, I found myself writing this sentence without thinking. Just because someone shares your name doesn't mean they deserve your peace. It stopped me cold, because that was it. That was the lesson. I hadn't walked away from a family. I'd walked away from being the version of myself they needed me to be: compliant, quiet, convenient. And in return, I'd found the version of me I'd buried under all those years of loyalty. I saw Rachel again last weekend. We met for coffee in the city, and when she asked if I'd consider reconnecting with the others, I answered without hesitation. I don't need revenge, but I'm not going back for apologies that were never meant for me. She nodded, understanding. They still don't talk about you out loud, she said, but no one's saying what they used to say either. The silence now, it feels like guilt. I smiled gently. That's theirs to live with, because healing isn't about forcing someone to feel remorse. It's about refusing to carry the weight of their choices on your back. That evening, I came home to find a small envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single photo. Me and my dad at my college graduation. He had one hand on my shoulder, the other in his jacket pocket. The smile I wore was wide, but I remembered how forced it felt, even then. On the back, in his handwriting, were 4 words. I didn't protect you. No signature, no explanation, just a quiet truth, far too late. I placed it in a drawer, not because it fixed anything, but because it confirmed what I already knew. This wasn't about repair, it was about release, and I had already set myself free. Now every step forward is mine, and every decision I make echoes the woman I became the moment I stopped being the safety net and became my own foundation. If you've ever felt like the glue that holds your family together, ask yourself what happens when that glue stops being invisible. When you ask for recognition, respect, or rest, how do they respond? And if the answer hurts, maybe it's time to build something of your own, even if you build it alone. Because peace isn't given, it's claimed. Thank you for following Elizabeth's story. If this resonated with you, share it with someone who's learning how to stand up for their time, their truth, or themselves. Leave a comment below and let us know. Have you ever had to walk away to find peace? And remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all, and just keep building.